Hi, my name is Brandon Shimoda. I'm a Yonsei descendant of Japanese American incarceration, joining you all from Tucson, Arizona. I'm going to read an abridged version of a chapter from my book, The Grave on the Wall. The chapter is called Fort Missoula. The first time I went to the ruins of Japanese American incarceration, I found my grandfather's face. It was hanging on the wall of the barracks in Fort Missoula, Montana. Fort Missoula was the first incarceration site I was conscious of visiting. Conscious because you cannot step foot anywhere in the United States without crossing a site where people have been targeted and detained. The fort was originally built to protect white settlers from the indigenous tribes who had lived in the valley for thousands of years. It was an open fort. There were no walls. The walls were assumed into the settlers' commitment to vigilance. In 1941, the Department of Justice transformed Fort Missoula into a prison. The prisoners were Italian and German nationals and Japanese immigrants. The Issei were 50 to 60-year-old men, religious leaders, teachers, business owners, gardeners, husbands, fathers, grandfathers, the majority of whom propagandized as fifth column terrorists and classified as enemy aliens had been detained in the days, in the hours even, after the attack on Pearl Harbor. My grandfather, Midori Shimoda, was the youngest. He was in his early 30s. Fort Missoula was not difficult to transform into a prison. It already possessed the qualities. In order for the settlers to be soothed by a sense of being protected, the fort had to establish the locus of power, cohesion, and sanctity on the inside. The outside, the landscape, its people were, to the logic of the fort, illegible, dangerous. This was the land the settlers were occupying. White settlers were the original aliens. They sought to diffuse their alienation by claiming the land and controlling the movement and rights of the indigenous people for whom the land was not alien but ancestral. Fort Missoula did not need to be turned inside out to become a prison. It only needed to reframe its identity. It is now a historical museum. My grandmother, her sister, and my aunt were the first in the family to visit. My grandmother, June, painted a summary picture. He played baseball, she said, then added, with the guards. There was no scene without the guards. That Midori played baseball with the guards proclaimed the camaraderie of prison existence. That the war was out there, not circumscribed by the barbed wire fence, the guns, the guard towers. He went fishing with the guards, June said. That Midori could stand side by side with a guard on the banks of the river not only illustrated his exemplary character, kind, optimistic, resilient, and provided proof that he was a model prisoner, but made me feel like I was being protected, lied to. I was angry. I did not know at what. June for withholding from me the true story or censoring it. Midori for withholding from June the true story, censoring it, or for standing side by side with the guards, or the guards. I imagined a field of blonde dirt and a landscape so desolate and flat, the horizon in every direction was below the field of view, so flat it curved, and a mass of men in silhouette, casting long shadows that expressed what remained of their spirit. I went to Fort Missoula for the first time in August 2004. I had moved to Missoula from North Carolina and had just arrived. The barracks were long, white, and removed at the opposite end of the field from the rest of the museum. The barracks' abandonment reminded me of Dorothy's house being thrown down on the outskirts of Oz. The building is one of the original barracks, and yet I could sense neither the presence nor even the absence of the men. Their memory had been replaced by front pages of newspapers. Honolulu Star Bulletin, December 7, 1941. War. Oahu bombed by Japanese planes. Seattle Post-Intelligencer, December 8, 1941. Japan, U.S. at war. Again, the Post-Intelligencer, April 13, 1945. President is dead. The Winona, Minnesota Republican Herald, August 14, 1945. Japan surrenders, World War over. And dozens of photographs providing an idyllic narrative of incarceration. Men in suits and hats eating noodles, men on horses, men beside a boat, men performing judo, a man holding a trout, men at a funeral, a man crouching in strawberries, men on a stage. The caption above the men on a stage read, "While alien hearing boards were investigating the loyalties of the hapless Japanese, Immigration Service immigrant inspectors were busy interrogating many Japanese at Fort Missoula who they suspected were in the United States illegally. Hapless, as if their incarceration was bad luck. The hearing board included INS and FBI agents and interpreters, many of whom were Korean. The question was not the legality of the men being in the United States, but their allegiance to it, the extent to which they had been drawn successfully away from Japan, their history, and, in no small part, themselves. 3 photographs stood out. In each, a man was wearing a light-colored dress, white gloves, stockings, high heels, and a wig of curly black hair. In one photograph, he was holding a purse. In another, he was lifting up his dress to expose his stockinged leg. A third photograph showed the man sitting in front of a mirror. In 2 of the photographs, he was surrounded by other men, all in suits and ties. He was the only man, in all the photographs, in a dress, therefore, to my mind, in disguise. I went to the ruins expecting to see my grandfather's face, but I did not think I would see my grandfather's face. So when I saw my grandfather's face, I felt sick. It was the kind of uncanny recognition that registers first as nausea. I turned away, then turned back, leaned closer, and touched him. The wall fell back. The roof of the barracks lifted off. Midori's face was brighter than daylight, and though I remember it being warm and round and full of love, I was part of it. I remember it being gray and soft and unaccountably sad, of a sadness I could not name. I saw my father's face for the first time in the frame of incarceration. I saw my sister's face. Midori was staring through the mirror, through the photographer, through the guards, through the mountains surrounding the valley, through the clouds washing down the faces of the mountains. I felt like I was being thrown through Midori's face into the immediacy of a history that was, until then, remote, more or less extinct. I ran across the field. The only person in the museum was the woman in the gift shop, Sharon. I told her I had just come from the barracks, that my grandfather was hanging on the wall. I described him. She told me to wait a minute, then disappeared. She returned with a 3-ring binder and an envelope. The binder contained photographs of the prisoners, mostly Italian, a few Germans, some Japanese. The Italians called Missoula Bella Vista. They were from Italy, lived in Italy. They were not immigrants. Some of them stayed in the valley after their release, so beautiful was their view. The photographs depicted the interstitial, less photogenic moments that illuminated incarceration as wasteland, arbitrary, confusion. The envelope contained 5 photographs from the binder Sharon had photocopied. All 5 were of Midori. They were taken by a man named Peter Fortune, an INS agent in Hawaii called up to Fort Missoula, where he worked in food service, and in his free time took photographs. In one of the photographs, Midori is wearing a bra and white slip, skin-toned stockings rolled down his thighs, and black shoes, and is posing alone, smiling. Midori's body and face are a map describing a territory I know or think I know, or have known, but which looks, from the vantage of this graphic projection, unfamiliar, another territory altogether. I try to locate myself. Every landmark and place name, every feature is visible, if not accessible at once, but the cardinal directions have switched places, have gone missing. Midori's eyes are clear, almost wet, with the flash of the light bulb twice reflected. His eyebrows are slightly raised. It is there that I begin to sense skepticism, concern, distrust, and its corresponding lack of agency, resignation. He is smiling, but the lines around his eyes are unmoved. His upper lip is straight, unconvinced. Sometimes his smile is a wave, sometimes a wound, sometimes not entirely his. If not, to whom and how many people, entities, institutions does my grandfather's smile belong? I refer to this photograph as my grandfather's grave because it is an icon of his arrest and was the first, most accessible place I could go to visit him after death. It is ironic, fitting, and utterly infuriating that his grave revealed itself to me on the wall of the barracks in which he was held under the pretext of being a threat to the national security of the country of which I am a citizen. When I left the museum, I felt infused with the spirit of connection. Midori and I had been reunited, but the feeling did not last. There was no sense that Midori had been waiting for me, his grandson, or anyone. Almost as soon as the body and face of incarceration were revealed, they were replaced with an unconquerable loneliness. The sky was low and tyrannically white. The mountains in the distance were suddenly very close, cliff-like and impenetrable. I called my grandmother, then my father. Their voices were soft, underwater. It was not that they did not seem interested in the photographs, but they did not ask any questions, which caused me to doubt what I had seen. It was true. The barracks, isolated and staged, manifested an alternate universe, one in which my desperation had been appeased. I had reduced the history of incarceration not only to Midori's face, but to my desire to understand. I slept for 1 year with Fortune's photograph of Midori, under my pillow, sometimes under my body. I wanted to sink with Midori through the bed, through the floor, into the ground, to commingle with what of him had been arrested. At night, Midori slipped out of bed. I awoke to see him climbing the wall. I watched him rise up the wall and curve onto the ceiling. I watched him slide down the wall and curve onto the floor. The moment Midori touched the floor, 2 voices emerged, the voice of a young woman and the voice of an old man. The voices emerged from behind my right ear, as if out of my shoulder. The woman and the man were talking to each other. Their voices were clear, I could hear every word. Sometimes they talked about me, and though I wondered what they made of me, I never discerned any judgment, only a kind of subtle expectation. I wondered if the young woman and the old man were related. I had the feeling they were the same person in 2 different phases of being. The young woman at the furthest limit of herself as an immigrant before becoming a citizen. The old man at the furthest limit of himself as a citizen before becoming a corpse. I tried every night to write down what they were saying, but whenever I shifted or fell further into sleep, their voices became softer, blurred together, then dissolved, only shadows rising and falling. I lived down the road from Fort Missoula for 4 years. I left in the spring of 2008. It rained for 1 month. The rivers flooded. A tree growing on the bank of the river lost its grip and fell into the water. The tree fell slowly. It formed a slash, then a hyphen in the air. I remember hearing, as I was leaving, the tree's roots tearing out of the valley.